All right, today we have another episode from the archives with one of my incredible guests. Enjoy. All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. All right, guys, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Very excited to introduce my guest today, Zabie Yamasaki. Zabie, welcome.
Thank you, Guy, for having me on the podcast. It's a real honor to share in the space and have this time with you and your audience.
All right. Zabie truly believes in the healing power of yoga and has had the opportunity to transform her own trauma through the healing asana practice. For years, Zabie's unfaltering support for survivors of sexual violence has manifested itself in many forms. She's ultimately made it her life's goal to help empower survivors of assault to regain their strength and self-worth. Zabie is a founding individual practitioner of the Breathe Network, an organization that connects survivors of sexual violence to holistic healing arts practitioners that offer all services on a sliding scale. She's the founder of Transcending Sexual Trauma Through Yoga, an organization with the mission of empowering survivors to heal through the practice of yoga. Awesome. Love your mission. Obviously, Zabie, that's just a little bit about you, but share with our listeners where you're from and where you're calling from, and then let's do it.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm based here in Los Angeles. As Guy mentioned, I am the founder of an organization called Transcending Sexual Trauma Through Yoga, which is an organization with a very simple mission, empowering survivors to heal through the practice of yoga. And I work part-time as the program director of trauma-informed programs at UCLA.
Awesome. And did you say where you're from?
Yes, born and raised in Southern California.
Oh, cool.
But my parents were born in Mumbai, in India, and that's actually, connects very deeply to the roots of yoga and why I even feel so connected to this practice, since yoga is a practice that comes from India and started as a means to transcend people's suffering. So I feel like that's a big part of my identity and why I feel so connected to this modality.
So let's start out here as we most often do with a quote, a mantra, a saying. What do you have for us, Zabie?
A mantra or a saying?
Or a quote.
Well, I have two. Can I share two?
Okay. Of course, yeah.
Well, the first is a quote from Ijeoma who is an incredible poet from Lagos, Nigeria. You may have heard this quote before, but it is, "Healing comes in waves, and maybe today the wave hits the rocks. And that's okay. That's okay, darling. You are still healing. You are still healing."
Wow, I love that. I haven't heard that. I love that. Spell the attribution again, the name of the person.
Sure. It's Ijeoma, Ijeoma, and the last name is umebinyuo, umebinyuo.
Awesome. Okay, and what's your next one?
So the next one is a longer one. It's from a woman named Danielle Capoque, whose writing was actually guided by sort of this concept of unapologetic vulnerability. She's a current graduate student in clinical psychology, and I read this quote often in many of the trauma-informed yoga classes that I teach. And it goes, "Most of my life has been spent trying to shrink myself, trying to become smaller, quieter, less sensitive, less opinionated, less needy, and less me. Because I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to be too much or push people away. I wanted people to like me. I wanted to be cared for and valued. I wanted to be wanted. So for years, I sacrificed myself for the sake of making other people happy. And for years, I suffered. But I'm tired of suffering. And I'm done shrinking. It's not my job to change who I am in order to become someone else's idea of a worthwhile human being. I am worthwhile, not because other people think I am, but because I exist, and therefore I matter. My thoughts matter. My feelings matter. My voice matters. And with or without anyone's permission or approval, I will continue to be who I am and speak my truth. Even if it makes people angry, even if it makes them uncomfortable, even if they choose to leave, I refuse to shrink. I choose to take up space. I choose to honor my feelings. And I choose to give myself permission to get my needs met. I choose to make self-care a priority. And I always choose me. Danielle Capoke.
Man, Zabie, you picked seriously 2 amazing quotes. That last one just gave me goosebumps, literally. Let's go with that last one, if it's okay. Why does that resonate with you, and when did that start happening for you?
Sure. I think as you articulated, every time I hear these words, every time I read these words to many of the survivors of sexual assault in my classes, I just think it speaks so beautifully to what it means to show up for our lives while honoring the many paradoxes, the many dualities of the healing journey, the very unlinear process, in embodying resilience, the ebbs and the flows. And I think, for many survivors of sexual trauma, they oftentimes move through their lives not being believed, feeling very small, feeling like they have to hide their pain or perhaps even move through it in isolation. And I think that this quote speaks to the struggle with speaking their truth and honoring their needs, and how beautiful it can be when we take up all the space we need and we deserve. And I feel like trauma survivors cannot be reminded enough of their worthiness and of their ability to be able to not shrink, to take up all the space that they deserve. And so every time I hear these words and I read them in classes, you see the tears streaming down people's faces. You see maybe a hand over the heart or a hand on the belly. They tend to really internalize these words, and they speak, very much in alignment with what their experience may have been or continues to be.
Thank you for that clarification. And I would even say, it just speaks beautifully to being a human, right? Not just people who've experienced trauma, but how did you get here, Zabie, such that, we're talking and you've pursued this path and you're dedicating your life to empowering survivors. How did you get here? And tell us that story.
Sure. Gosh, there's so much to say. Where do I even begin? I think for me, I carry some of my most painful and traumatic experiences in my body. My body remembers. And there are still so many places within myself that feel very fragile, that feel very tender, that need extra nourishment and support and intentionality. And each day for me is really a recommitment to loving myself more fully, to being attuned in any given moment to what my body needs and what it's communicating to me. And, living with trauma can make it really difficult to access parts of ourselves that feel frozen or numb or even too painful to explore. And for me, as a survivor of sexual trauma, I spent years searching for a cure to my suffering. I suffered quite viscerally from the impact of my trauma, whether it was, manifested as overwhelming anxiety or GI issues or flashbacks, nightmares, toxic relationships, overworking. The list goes on. It really wasn't until I arrived to the practice of yoga that I recognized that reclaiming choice with my body was going to be an ongoing process for the rest of my life. And when I was within the four corners of my mat, I started to recognize that I could protect my energy, that I could protect my peace. I gradually started embracing relief and joy, even if those moments were really fleeting for me. The practice of yoga has helped me find words for what those internal sensations are communicating to me. But the practice has also given me permission to move forward when there are just no words to do justice to what I'm experiencing. And I think it's allowed me to take control of my healing in very profound ways, helping me feel more grounded, helping me really get into my window of tolerance, starting to notice when I might be moving in and out of dysregulation. It's given me a tool for self-expression and self-compassion, and it's helped me find a safe home within myself. And I know for many trauma survivors, seeking safety or finding safety within ourselves can be an ongoing challenge.
Right.
And yoga certainly can never take away anything that has been done to me, but it's certainly shown me that my light is very, very bright. And, as a woman of color, it's taken me years to truly see myself, to believe that my voice matters and what I have to say matters. I think even when I started doing and teaching some of these trauma-informed yoga trainings, I had to take moments to pause and say, can I do this? Am I worthy of sharing my voice? Do people want to learn from me? And so my practice is something that I can continue to come back to that just helps ground me amidst the chaos.
How did you find yoga within your healing journey? Talk a little bit about that.
That's a great question. I was just having this conversation with someone recently because the two, my trauma used to be in this box over here, and then my yoga practice was in this box over here. And to be honest, I didn't always initially make the connection between the two, that my yoga practice was playing such an integral role in my healing. But I started to sort of, it wasn't even something that I recognize on my own. Others started reflecting back to me some of the things that I had been working on in therapy for years that I just couldn't quite make that connection to. And it was, you seem lighter, you seem happier, you seem like something has lifted, you seem like you're not carrying around this burden. It was hard for people to articulate. And I think as people started reflecting it back to me, and I was so committed to my practice, as difficult and as messy as it was, sometimes I would arrive to my mat and just cry. There wasn't a lot of movement happening, but it was certainly a safe place that I could return to. And I realized that I wasn't the only person who was looking for another way to heal from my trauma, and I wanted to share the practice with others. And that's what really brought me to what I'm doing now.
And how did you get from there to teaching to this place where this is your mission? How did that happen?
Oh my gosh, it's been such a beautiful journey. Transcending sexual trauma through yoga, it started as a very small vision, and it has now grown in ways beyond my imagination. I'm now working with over 20 college campuses and trauma agencies and helping them infuse trauma-informed yoga into the current scope of their services, and training yoga teachers and mental health professionals in this modality from all across the world. And, to be honest, Guy, it initially started as an idea. I wanted to develop an 8-week program for sexual assault survivors. I wrote this curriculum that aligns with the needs of survivor experiences. So the themes include things like assertiveness and boundaries and self-care and safety. And from there, I just continued to offer the curriculum. I spoke at conferences. Other universities would start to refer me to folks who had a good experience working with me. And then it just continued building and building. And I used to be this, I was like the traveling yogi. I had all of these yoga mats in the back of my car, and I was driving from one university and one trauma agency to the next, trying to teach all of these classes myself. I mean, that was definitely an early mistake and something that I have learned a lot from. And then I realized, I want to teach this modality. I want to teach what I've learned from holding space for trauma survivors within these various yoga settings. I want to share it with other people. And I had a collaboration with a local donation-based yoga studio called Be the Change here in Irvine, California. And it started as me just offering a weekly trauma-informed yoga class at the studio. And then it grew to me leading teacher trainings there. And now folks come from all over to participate in them. And
wow.
It sort of was this very organic, I think that's the power and the beauty of passion and believing in our voice and believing that we have something to share and just trusting in those gifts. And that's what I did. And I nurtured it, and I learned about marketing, and, it's really a family business. My husband takes the photographs. My sister-in-law does the website. And I think there's something really special about that too, about it being nurtured by the family as well.
I mean, it sounds easy in one sense to talk about, okay, you had this, the transition. I'm curious about the transition, Zabie, for you of, discovering the healing power of yoga for yourself and then moving into this place where you're actually, teaching and consulting. What was going on and I know it's it doesn't come like in a flash, but if you could talk about that process where you discovered, well, wait a minute, I'm getting, this is really quote unquote working for me. I'm seeing this shift in myself. Let me then take this next step and help others. Talk more about that process, the nuts and bolts of that for you. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, I think it might help to kind of give some of the background pieces on sort of my mission and what sort of eventually brought me to that place. Is that okay to start there?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Something I feel very passionate about is helping the world understand how critical it is to respond to the nuances of the needs of sexual trauma survivors. And in a lot of my professional roles, I was giving presentations on trauma, talking about the impact of trauma, talking about how to support survivors. And as I was presenting, without a doubt, after every presentation I would facilitate, there would be a number of survivor disclosures afterwards. And I started to engage in numerous conversations with survivors, and many of them, there were some consistent themes that started coming up. One was this need to feel something tangible. Survivors really wanted to feel like they could regain power and control of their body. They were looking for something to help them manage the painful triggers and the physiological symptoms that were arising every single day. And another was many of them were just not quite ready to process their experiences through talk therapy. And we know, due to the impact of trauma on the brain, we also know how difficult it can be for survivors to recount certain memories associated with their trauma, and the shame and blame they oftentimes experience from folks even during the help-seeking process. And I just felt so passionate about integrating body-based modalities into the healing process. I felt like my healing was so interconnected with the survivors that I was working with, and I wanted to create a very soulful and intersectional program that spoke to the language of the body, because we know how the spectrum of healing is so vast, and everyone that listens to your podcast and that you've interviewed knows that not every survivor will heal in the same way, and due to things like stigma around help-seeking or cultural barriers, I feel like it's so critical that we increase accessibility to these multiple pathways. And, actually there's something that has changed my practice in profound ways as I think about the impact of trauma on the body and how we carry certain physiological symptoms. So Amy Wheeler, she's an amazing yoga therapist, and she talks about this concept of vasanas, which are essentially emotional imprints that live in the body. They oftentimes get deep-rooted or hardwired or lodged in various areas of our body, depending on the nature of our trauma. And when they remain in our body undigested or unprocessed, when the nervous system is overwhelmed, trauma symptoms begin to manifest, right? So this can impact our nervous system, our endocrine system, our physiology, and we can start experiencing things like chronic pain or illness or other physical symptoms. And I just continued to see survivors coming forward who weren't necessarily getting support in any other way. And to give you some context, in the first quarter that we offered the yoga program at UCLA, the trauma-informed yoga program, we had 40 sexual assault survivors submit an interest form to want to participate. And of those 40, only 10 of them were currently connected to a victim advocate or to mental health support in some capacity. So the other 30, this was their first entry point in getting any type of support related to their trauma. And that was just a really profound moment for me when I recognized, we were losing too many survivors who weren't coming forward to seek support because perhaps traditional methods of healing weren't at the time accessible for them. And so I really started to pay attention to the demographics, to the numbers, to recognize that we had to be more intentional about finding another way to get folks connected to support. And now here I am.
Wow.
And it's bigger than me.
That's such an incredible story. Zabie, what do you think it is, about you that allows you to do this work? This is your mission, but what do you think it is about yourself that allows you to keep doing this on a day-to-day basis?
Oh, is that a hidden self-care question?
No. It wasn't a. I didn't intend it as a self-care question. But I'm just curious. What do you think it is that allows you, not in an endurance sense, but in a kind of quote unquote why sense?
Yeah. Oh gosh, I think that there's so much that I want to say here, and I like to talk a lot, so I want to really be thoughtful about what I say. But I feel very committed to helping survivors find this balance between safety and vulnerability, between grief and joy, constantly reminding students that they're never alone in their struggle. in the healing spaces that I strive to cultivate in this work, the community feel is very palpable. There's something that's really powerful about survivors coming together in community, breathing together, moving together. Perhaps they're not there to talk about their past experiences of trauma, but there's something that really shifts in the room. And it's such a beautiful process to be witness to. And I think that, when I started paying attention to the difference between how I felt perhaps when I was out there doing trauma presentations or doing outreach, running from one presentation to the next or one meeting to the next, and then the difference between how I would feel after those days versus how I would feel after leading a trauma-informed yoga class. The energy that I had at the end of the day was vastly different. I was doing something that I felt passionate about and connected to, but not in a way that overwhelmed me. I've really been thinking about this question a lot of, how can we do what we love but not be overcome by it? Right. And it's sort of thinking about the concept of trauma. I really feel like I've been thinking a lot recently about how overworking is a big symptom of my trauma. And I never thought about it that way. And the more that I've given that concept in being intentional about it and taking the space I need and being committed to my own rituals, it allows me to honor the responsibility of what it means to hold space for others. Yeah. So I think, is that making sense? I have so many thoughts that I'm... No.
Yeah, it's making a lot of sense, and I just think that your process and your journey and listening to how it's unfolded is it's really inspiring. I mean, I love talking to people like yourself who are on a mission and especially with this topic. I mean, it's just so crazy. I mean, in your experience, currently, are you seeing more people willing to, get help, willing to raise their hands and say, you know what, I need help? What's your experience?
You mean as a result of participating?
Yeah.
In the yoga program?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for asking that question, because I have found that for many of the survivors that I've worked with, that yoga provides a different entry point for folks to seek safety. And we're finding that many survivors, not only through the yoga program are they gaining tools to help manage symptoms of PTSD or anxiety or depression. It's helping them manage triggers or panic attacks as they arise, but it's also empowering them to seek additional resources in their recovery. And so, when I'm giving presentations on trauma-informed yoga and thinking about sort of the multiple pathways and multiple approaches to care, I oftentimes have a slide up that has different bubbles, the survivors in the center, because their trauma-informed care is, holds this deep knowing and this deep belief that the survivor is at the center of their own experience, but there's many different resources that are available to them, and it can feel so overwhelming to know where to begin. Do I go speak to the victim advocate? Should I go to the support group that's only running once a month? Or should I make an appointment to meet with a therapist, but I don't know how to find a therapist who's a good fit? There's so many barriers to navigate in the process. And as I think about all of those resources that survivors are oftentimes presented with, I think about, gosh, how can we not give them the tools to help balance their nervous systems as they start to sift through all of the chaos of, all of this information. we need to give them the tools to help find that safety and find that support within themselves so they can make informed decisions about what they need and what best serves them. And so I'm finding that the yoga program has really been integral to that. And it's allowed me to work so collaboratively with my colleagues. For, many survivors decide after the yoga program that they feel empowered to report their assault to law enforcement or to the Title IX office on campus because they feel so strong and stable in their body, and they've developed this incredible community of support, or they're ready to address their medical needs, or they feel like, wow, I've processed a lot of trauma in my body. I want to talk about it with somebody. Will you help me with that process? And it's beautiful to see the resources working so collaboratively to best support the needs of the survivor.
So I just want to remind everybody that I'm speaking with Zabie Yamasaki, and she can be reached at zabieyamasaki.com. Links will be up at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. All right, Zabie, let's kind of shift gears here and have you offer a go-to book or two, whether trauma related or yoga related or not. What do you recommend?
Oh, just one?
No, you can do two.
Okay. My all-time favorite is Yoga for Emotional Balance by Bo Forbes. She's an incredible yoga therapist based in Boston. Okay. And I also love the book Survivors on the Yoga Mat by Becky Thompson.
Okay. She's actually been a past guest here on the podcast.
She has?
Becky Thompson, yeah. So that's Survivors on the Yoga Mat by Becky Thompson and Yoga for Emotional Balance, Simple Practices to Help Relieve Anxiety and Depression by Bo Forbes. Awesome. All right. So you, Zabie, so if someone wants to get in touch with you, or let me rephrase that, who should get in touch with you?
Sure. So there's a number of ways that I work with folks. I offer 3-day in-person trauma-informed yoga teacher trainings that are open to anyone. So yoga teachers, mental health professionals who want to learn how to teach from a trauma-informed lens. That's both in person and online. And I work with survivors of sexual trauma teaching classes in the community here in Los Angeles and also online. And I work as a consultant for a number of trauma agencies and universities. So if folks are interested in learning how to start a program at their agency, I'm happy to support in that process.
Awesome. Okay. And the best way for people to get in contact with you is what?
My website is great. I also keep my Instagram updated pretty frequently. So it's transcending_trauma_with_yoga. Okay. We'll have that linked up also. All right, Zabie, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. You are a powerhouse. I mean, you're on a mission and I love it. I mean, this is incredible. I mean, I think it's just what people need out there. It's inspiring talking to you. Oh, it was so inspiring talking to you. That went so fast. I know, it goes fast. I'll have you back. Awesome. Thank you so much, Guy. All right, take care. Okay, you too.